Good morning, everyone. This is Glenn Hammer of the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Economic Forecast, COVID-19 Impacts on Arizona's Economy. I want to thank our members who are joining us today to hear from Dr. George Hammond of the University of Arizona, Fairdown. I'd like to acknowledge at the beginning our webinar sponsor, Arizona Strategies, a premier land use strategy team. Many thanks to Karen Taylor Robeson, founder and president of Arizona Strategies, and a member of our board of directors, and just a great Arizonan who contributes so much to the richness of this state.
I think I need your help again.
I want to also acknowledge our chairman level member of the University of Arizona, our board member and my good friend Steve Voller and his team, especially Katie Daphne, who used to work for us and did a fantastic job for us. And the University of Arizona is very lucky to have you. But before I formally introduce Dr. George Hammond, I'd like to cover a couple of housekeeping items. Oh yeah, that photo was probably taken right after my bar mitzvah and certainly before the pandemic when I could actually get a haircut. The format of this webinar is conversational. I'll field questions to our economists throughout the webinar. I encourage you to submit questions via the chat throughout the conversation, and our team will be monitoring the chat. And we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar when you can pose your questions directly to our great expert. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Hammond. The doctor directs the Economic and Business Research Center in the Eller College of Management. He's a specialist in econometric forecasting. And for more than 2 decades, Dr. Hammond has designed, built, and used economic models to produce more than 100 forecasts for state and local economies and completed more than 50 regional economic studies. And he's a frequent, many of you have seen him all over the media. He's been featured in NBC Nightly News, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Bloomberg Business Week, and the New York Times. In addition to directing EBRC and spearheading its forecasting project, he's also a research professor. Dr. Hammond, welcome to our webinar.
Thanks, Glenn. It's great to be here.
Oftentimes, looking at history helps us understand our current situation, although I sometimes wonder with so many different things happening at once, how much history is going to help us. But if we could go back to sort of the last economic shocks this country faced in 2008, the financial meltdown, how does this recession stack up with some of the other difficult times we've had in our state and our country's history? And welcome.
Thanks. Well, the current downturn is like nothing we've seen in about 100 years. The downturn was driven by a pandemic, and that really makes it so different from all of our prior downturns, including what we used to call the Great Recession during the 2008-2009 period. Actually, in Arizona, it lasted about 3 years. So, what we're going through now is really different, and it's different in all kinds of ways. It's hitting different industries. The kind of pattern of the impacts that we're seeing in the job data are just completely different from anything that we're used to seeing. We're used to seeing in recessions nationally and in Arizona, kind of these little bite-sized drops of employment that happen over months and months. But, what we got with the pandemic impacts during the kind of February to April period was just this gargantuan drop in jobs in Arizona. Arizona lost about 300,000 jobs from February to April, and that's about a 10% decline in employment over just a couple of months. And that is roughly approximately the same scale as the overall peak to trough job loss that we experienced during the Great Recession or the Great Financial Crisis. You know, in Arizona, that lasted about 3 years, and we lost about 300,000 jobs for about a 10 to 11% peak to trough decline. So, you know, in terms of broad magnitude, what happened in just a couple of months was pretty similar to what Arizona went through during that Great Recession. Now, the industries that were affected were just completely different. This downturn was really focused on the sectors that rely on people getting together, gathering together in close proximity. So, you know, we saw the really big job losses in leisure and hospitality. So that's, you know, arts, entertainment, and recreation. So gyms would be included in there. The interruption to the minor league season, the ticket sales, the jobs related to that would be included there. Also saw big job losses in accommodation, so hotels and motels, resorts, and also big job losses in eating and drinking places, so restaurants and bars. Kind of a surprise, though, we saw big job losses in healthcare. And for a lot of us economists looking at this and, you know, thinking in February and early March, you know, we thought maybe healthcare would actually see job growth during the pandemic as healthcare workers were transitioned from other activities into helping to care for people that were ill with COVID. But we really didn't see that, partly because the pandemic, at least initially in Arizona, wasn't particularly severe. In addition, the governor restricted medical care, you know, so that you know, elective surgeries were not to be performed. So we actually saw big job losses at dentist offices, doctors' offices, even some hospitals. So, you know, healthcare got a much bigger hit than we initially expected. Professional and business services also was significantly affected, especially temporary employees. So they're almost always the first to go during a downturn. And of course, we also saw big job losses from February to April in trade as, you know, non-essential retail activity was restricted. So, you know, that's just so different from what we went through during the 2008-2009 downturn. As we all remember, Arizona was really the epicenter, or one of the epicenters, of the housing bust. So we saw these, you know, amazing job losses in construction and real estate related activities. Construction's doing pretty well. Housing permits really surged significantly in June. It looks like construction activity is going to hold up pretty well as we go through the next couple of months. So this is really a whole different animal.
How does the Arizona experience for this pandemic-induced recession compare to the national picture?
Well, the nation actually got hit significantly harder. Nationally, from February to April, the U.S. decline was about 14.5% of jobs lost. Even through June, you know, Arizona has seen job growth over the last couple of months. We're about 5% below where we were in February. The nation is down almost 10% below where it was. So I think we've seen other states, particularly on the coast, that have really been much more aggressive with the shutdowns. I think people have been a lot more worried about the impacts of the disease than in some other states. So, you know, the national downturn has been more severe. Arizona has done better. In terms of the unemployment rate picture, Arizona's unemployment rate is 10%. That's pretty close to where we were at the peak during the Great Recession. But that's a little bit below the national unemployment rate at 11.1% in June. So we have actually come through, even though it's been a big hit, Arizona has come through in a bit better shape than has the national economy.
Speaking of unemployment, Governor Ducey recently sent a letter to the congressional delegation. Our members of Congress are in the process of negotiating a fifth major bill, and the governor addressed the issue of providing some sort of extension of the federal top-up. I believe he was saying the level for Arizonans out of work, certainly through no fault of their own, should at least be the level of the wages that they were making while working. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on the federal pandemic unemployment compensation and how that fits into the Arizona and sort of the national economic picture?
Sure. The CARES Act had a number of major provisions that I think have really helped Arizona weather the downturn. One of those is the changes to the unemployment compensation system. And there were a couple of major provisions. One was to expand the eligibility for unemployment insurance to individuals who prior to the CARES Act would not be covered. Those are the self-employed, gig or contract workers, and others, primarily those who are directly affected by the outbreak, say they actually have contracted COVID or are caring for someone who's contracted it. So that expansion of the coverage will actually last through the end of the year. But what's got a lot of attention these days is that incremental benefit, the $600 per week addition to the normal state benefit, which in Arizona is $240 per week, one of the lowest in the country. So including that federal benefit, and keep in mind that $600 addition expired at the end of July. But combining the federal addition to Arizona's regular rate gets us up to $840 per week as a maximum. And that's significantly high relative to Arizona's wage structure. For the average leisure and hospitality worker, their weekly wage was in the neighborhood of $430 per week. So that's a significant increase. The large numbers of people who are receiving those benefits are actually making more than through the unemployment compensation system than they were through their regular work. So there's been a lot of concern on the labor supply incentive impacts. There's basically no evidence nationally that that $600 increment has had any significant disincentive impact on people seeking work. Instead, it seems like what we have seen, we're seeing a lot more evidence for the stimulus impact of those unemployment benefits, right? For an individual who becomes unemployed, they need that money, and it's allowing them to buy food, to pay rent, and to cover expenses. So, just in the period from early March through July 25th, the unemployment compensation system in Arizona overall, including the regular system and the expanded system, has injected $8.2 billion into the state economy. And that's a significant number. That's about 2.4% of Arizona's total personal income in 2019, right? So that's a big injection of income, and that's likely spurred additional spending in the state. It's helped to sustain it, and to spur it, that has helped to sustain Arizona's overall tax revenues. And you also want to keep in mind that those unemployment benefits are subject to the state's income tax. And that's also helped to stabilize Arizona's revenues as we go through the downturn. So the unemployment benefits have been a significant part of why I think Arizona has done relatively well coming through the pandemic so far. You also want to keep in mind there are other major provisions, the Paycheck Protection Program You know, the numbers we're seeing bandied about is about $7 billion perhaps injected into the state economy. That would be about 2.1% of our personal income last year. So the unemployment system plus the Paycheck Protection Program, that's 4.5%. Don't forget the recovery rebates that happened in April. That's, you know, another couple $2 billion. So somewhere north of 5% of Arizona's personal income last year has been injected into the state in just a couple of months. So I think that's had a significant impact on our ability to deal with the pandemic thus far.
And Doctor, I appreciate how you pair the Paycheck Protection Program, because I think the latest numbers now have it at 81,000 small businesses, over 8.5 billion. So it's gone up even in the last few weeks. And then you add in some of the other small business loans, but you add in the UI and the Paycheck Protection Program, that's a lot. And it seems to me that it's vital for, in some shape, form, or fashion, that Congress really needs to extend and make those programs continue in a way that's most, maybe there needs to be some more flexibility, but in some form, it seems that that's pretty important to make sure that the Arizona, the national economy, can keep at least moving forward as we're still dealing with the pandemic.
That's right. Keep in mind that a lot of this data that I've been quoting to you ends in June. So that was most of that stuff was measured in early June before the resurgence in the pandemic really picked up speed. So I think we'll see somewhat slower improvement in Arizona as we get into the July and August data.
What do we know with the information that's available in terms of our sales tax revenue, our revenue collections as a state, in terms of where they are and what people have forecast? How should we be thinking about that? The state's budget is always, you know, really our top priority when we're on the advocacy side. So what have we seen thus far in terms of the effect of the pandemic on our state's budget?
Well, revenue growth at the state level was really strong through the first 8 months of the fiscal year. Once the pandemic hit, we saw a pretty significant decline. Now, you know, I was one of those people forecasting state revenues during that March and April period, and you know, it's one thing to keep in mind is that there has been and continues to be a significant amount of uncertainty about how this is all going to play out. But, you know, at the time, we didn't know how long the stay-at-home order would last in Arizona. I can speak for myself. My projections in March and April assumed that those stay-at-home orders would last all the way through the summer into August. That didn't happen. The state reopened quickly and rebounded faster than expected. I think the impact of the CARES Act was certainly bigger than I thought it would be going into this. So the good news here is that the state, even though we've seen revenue declines through the last 4 months of the fiscal year, has done better than expected when we were forecasting, or at least when I was forecasting in March and April. So that's some of the good news about how the state revenues are playing out. You know, we've seen taxable retail sales bounce back strongly. Again, I would put some of that on the employment rebound and some on the CARES Act, Paycheck Protection Program, and unemployment benefits, as well as the recovery rebates. We've seen the actually contracting taxable sales they're up in June. They were up 20% over the year. That I think is due in large part to the recovery rebates. At least played a significant role there. I think now that we're all spending a lot more time at home and in our home offices than we were before, we're starting to look like a good idea to invest in the house a little bit more than maybe we were before. Also seeing evidence of that nationally. Home renovation and remodeling, that's expected to be a growth sector as we look to the future. So, you know, in terms of tax revenues, it's really been those sectors that are most tied to people getting together. So Amusements, tax revenue there is down massively. Same for restaurants and bars, and other sectors that really rely on people getting together. A lot of the other sectors have done better.
And I saw a question pop on my screen, but I think it's very relevant to your comments. It's one of the things we fought for in the chamber during tax reform about a year or so ago, and I've lost complete track of time. So I think it was about a year ago, was a fix for Wayfair. So online sales tax would be collected. What are you seeing in terms of that change to Arizona's law? Has that been something that perhaps has helped stabilize some of the state's finances and localities as well?
Yeah, absolutely. The tax collections from remote sellers is, I believe, it's over $100 million. So it's, I think, 128, somewhere in that vicinity, $128 million so far this fiscal year. So it's become already a significant part of the sales tax collection system, and that has helped to sustain revenues. We've also seen withholding, income tax withholding really hold up well during the past 4 months. And there, I think some of that is we can attribute to the unemployment benefits through the CARES Act. Those unemployment benefits are subject to income tax.
Well, I'm starting to think that we've become an Amazon distribution center since the pandemic, because it's unreal. What are some of you mentioned in your comments, and you were sort of getting that, things were really looking better economically in June, and then we hit the point in July where we were the epicenter. Thank God we no longer are, and the cases seem to be coming down, and the hospitalizations and all the bad things associated with the virus. But what are some of the different scenarios we should look at through at least the end of the calendar year in terms of Arizona's economy?
Yeah, economists have been talking about this alphabet soup of scenarios for how things may play out this year. We're talking about the V-shaped recovery, which would be a very rapid, maybe getting back to the pre-pandemic levels of activity in 2020 even. There are, U-shaped scenarios where we kind of grind along the bottom for a while. That doesn't seem to have happened. We bounced back off the bottom pretty quickly. And that brings us to the most unique shape of all, which is the square root recovery, right? Where we bounce back really strongly for the first couple of months, and then we kind of flatline for a couple of months, and then grow back. And a variant of that is sometimes called the Nike swoosh recovery, and that's kind of what my model has been generating, where Arizona gets back to the pre-pandemic level of economic activity sometime in the mid to second half of 2021. There's a huge amount of uncertainty about how this is all going to play out, and it's all connected to the uncertainty about the outbreak and exactly how the virus itself works. So if we get a big surge of the outbreak and combined with a severe flu, that would generate sort of a W-shaped recovery, or the dreaded double dip recovery, where we recover for a while and then everything hits again, we shut down again, and everything gets reset back to somewhere where we were in April. And that's kind of the worst case scenario that economists are working their way through. If we can avoid a significant surge in the outbreak as we go through the fall and winter months, I think we'll continue on a gradual recovery trajectory, probably a Nike swoosh type recovery, getting us back to where we were before the pandemic in mid 2021 or the second half of 2021. But, we just don't know how all this is going to play out. So, when I think about the probabilities of these things, I give the baseline or the Nike swoosh recovery about a 50% probability. Something significantly slower, maybe including a W-shaped recovery, about a 30% chance, and then a V-shaped recovery where we get back to pretty close to where we were in early 2021, about a 20% chance. So, there's a big range. There's a lot of uncertainty here, but that's the thinking at the moment.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, and this was also in part a question that flashed in front of the screen, is the Feds have put in about $3 trillion. The House passed HEROES Act is $3.5 trillion. The Senate bill is $1 trillion. Let's assume it'll be somewhere in between those two numbers. How concerned are you about inflation? I noticed the dollar isn't quite as strong as it was a month or so ago. How should we be thinking about that and our national debt as we start climbing, we start hurtling towards 30 trillion? Right.
So those are two concerns that can never be completely off the radar screen. With the unemployment rate around 10%, the standard models like mine just won't generate much concern about inflation until it gets back down to where it was before the pandemic. So I'm not worried about inflation in the near term. The Federal Reserve, at least my reading of it, has proved that they can operate well with a greatly enlarged balance sheet compared to what we're used to historically. So I think the Federal Reserve, as long as it remains independent and focused on its traditional objectives of inflation, employment, we should be okay, but it's always something that's going to be on the radar screen, particularly as the unemployment rate comes down. So we'll be watching that. Everybody will be watching that going forward. The dollar is a concern. The federal debt is the same sort of thing. It will be a concern going forward. I don't think it's a concern for the next several months. We should be focused on making sure that the recovery is solid and sustainable and that we get through the pandemic. But once we do, then the debt will again start to rise on the list of concerns, and that's something that we're going to want to think about because we are continuing to age. The baby boomers, of which I'm at the tail end of that group, are continuing to retire in large numbers. That's going to put pressure on the labor market. That will help contribute to the unemployment rate coming back down. And we'll see where we are with wage pressures going forward, and with what we decide to do to work with the federal deficit and federal entitlement spending.
Dr. Hammond, I'd like to wrap up this part of our conversation with my favorite topic, and that's trade. And you oversee the Arizona-Mexico economic indicators, and I just personally love your work and have used it in many of my presentations. Could you talk a bit about trade numbers between Mexico and Arizona? And I have to, this is my favorite report. USMCA just took effect July 1. This was a report we did with the Arizona-Mexico Commission. We know there's, tens of thousands, really hundreds of thousands of jobs wrapped into Arizona in trade. Would love your thoughts on trade in general.
Well, thanks for the shout out to the Arizona-Mexico Economic Indicator site, and your members can just Google Arizona-Mexico Economic Indicators, and that will get you to the site really quick. I also want to thank the sponsors that make that site possible: Arizona-Mexico Commission, ADOT, the ACA, and the Arizona Office of Tourism. So that site is devoting to helping us here in Arizona and policymakers and business leaders around the nation and around the world understand Arizona's role in border trade. So we track all of the high frequency data on Arizona exports, imports. We track what we call commodity flows. So those are flows of goods between Arizona and Mexico through our border ports of entry. We also track legal northbound border crossings into Arizona. That's a key measure of tourism activity. We know that Mexican visitors are a key part of the tourism industry here in Arizona, and there's a wealth of other data there as well. And what we see in that trade data, and we track the latest monthly data, through May, is just this gigantic drop in economic activity is mirrored in that trade activity. So 30-40% drops in Arizona's exports to Mexico and imports from Mexico. We also have data for Canada as well, so you can track overall NAFTA activity. Same thing with the commodity flows, those in and out flows across the border through our border ports of entry, down about 30 to 40%, both imports and exports. And the border crossings data with latest we have is through March, but that was already, even in March, was down 30% over the year. So we've seen a big impact. That impact is likely to be temporary as we work our way through the pandemic. We get a vaccine, we get therapeutics, we figure out better ways to be able to work in somewhat closer quarters, even while the pandemic is going on, and figure out ways to do that safely. We'll see that trade activity start to increase again. And, it's really nice to see the USMCA enforce. Having it enforced removes a lot of uncertainty about the trade picture. It allows us to focus on trade and competitiveness within the NAFTA region. And as we improve our competitiveness as a region, that makes us all better off as we look to compete with producers around the world, in Asia, and Europe, and around the world. So that competitiveness will be key in driving our standard of living up, into improving the variety of and quality of goods that we see locally. We know NAFTA really contributed to increased trade, and I'm confident that we'll get back on that growth track.
It seems also, with all the conversation, and it's bipartisan, it doesn't seem to matter who's in control of the Congress or the White House, that there's a strong desire to bring supply chains from overseas, and it really, the focus is China, back to the United States and to North America. And wondering what your thoughts on how that's all going to play out with, it seems it's Team USA and Team China. And with the USMCA wiring, it seems that this would be the time to really accelerate. And for Arizona, where we're building more and more stuff, electric vehicles like Lucid, it seems that this could be part of our economic recovery solution.
Yes, absolutely. The trend towards shortening supply chains had already begun prior to the pandemic. The pandemic in the near term will accelerate those trends, particularly for certain goods that are going to be viewed as things we want to be able to produce close to home, personal protective equipment, healthcare equipment, things along those lines. But I think we will see a continued trend towards shortening of those supply chains, and that will be good for the NAFTA region overall. But you want to keep in mind that the supply chains evolve for really good reasons, and once we get control of the outbreak, the reasons that made those long supply chains profitable, that will reassert itself, at least to some extent. But we'll continue to see that competitive pressure. So the more that we do to make the NAFTA region and the U.S. economy more competitive, the better off we'll be in the long run.
We certainly hope so, and believe that's the case. Wanted to get back to one thing. One of the meetings that Governor Ducey had with business people, he mentioned something very interesting to me, that the mitigation steps that he took at the end of June, and we're talking about some of the things with bars, lounges, fitness clubs, but also the limiting capacity in restaurants, but also wearing masks, socially distancing, proper hand hygiene, no adult congregation, no large adult congregations. I just wanted to get any thoughts on how you think about that from an economic standpoint. If we do, particularly, and let's separate out some of the governor's orders with respect to business, and just focus on things we could do as everyday citizens or within our businesses, such as wearing masks, social distancing? How should we be thinking of that just in terms of sort of from a raw economic perspective?
Well, my view, and this is as a non-healthcare scientist, not an epidemiologist, but my reading of what I'm seeing has evolved over the past 3 months. We are learning about where the big risks are and what we can do to reduce those risks. And I think the list you read down is some really good common sense advice for things that we can do ourselves to contribute to getting control over the outbreak. And the sooner that we have control over the outbreak, the faster things will go back to normal. So, I think wearing masks, the 6-foot social distancing as far as we can, the no large gatherings, smaller capacities for restaurants, particularly the bars, seem to be an issue based on what we know now. So just doing those common sense things, I think makes a lot of sense. That's what I do personally. But we'll learn more as we move forward through the outbreak, and the more that we learn, the more precise we can be about the steps that we take that will have the greatest impact on reducing the breadth of the outbreak.
Because one of the things that I believe I've learned is that Dr. Burke said that basically all those mitigation efforts is about equal to a stay-at-home order. So it's just the power for us to do sort of common sense type things in a pandemic is very powerful. And, to me, we're sort of saying wearing a mask is a pretty small price to pay to keep the world's most dynamic economy open to the fullest extent we possibly can safely. My final thing, and then there's a couple of good questions on the board, is that, there's a lot of discussion about schools, K through 12 schools reopening, and our universities. And I have a teenager who's heading off to another Arizona institution. I did my best. I love Dr. Robbins, but I'm non-denominational. Three girls are each going to go to one of our state schools. So, but the universities are trying to open for in-person. There's a goal to get our K through 12 system. Is there any way we should be thinking about that economically? Because our education system is a big part of our state's economy. And I just want to say, University of Arizona, I mean, it is a cornerstone. It's a crown jewel for the state of Arizona. And we love the work that Dr. Robbins has done. And we appreciate also what he's been contributing in terms of antibody tests and things like that, maybe outside of the normal scope of what people think about universities.
Yes, economically, the universities are key contributors to the state economy. We are part of the system, along with K through 12 and the community colleges and others. We're part of the system by which we generate human capital. And one of the things that we know is that over the past 20 or 30 years, human capital has been a key driver of our improvement in our standard of living. And what I'm seeing these days makes me think that, the next 20 or 30 years, it will be at least as important or more important in driving the development of our overall standard of living and quality of life. So education is key. And this is just like all of the other elements that we're trying to deal with. We're working as hard as we can to figure out ways to provide education, this necessary key education, in a way that's as safe as possible, so that we can keep the outbreak under control until we have effective therapeutics or a vaccine or both. So it's a real challenge where everyone in the education system is struggling with how to do that best, both jointly and individually. And it's something that we're going to essentially figure out as we move through the pandemic.
Doctor, thank you. I've noticed, and I think I hope we have time for a few more questions. I noticed there's a couple of good questions that came up on the chat. So if anyone has some additional, please put them up, and I'll try to get to them. We have one about, you mentioned the swoosh square root model. Any prediction on the percentage of seasonal winter residents returning to Arizona? You know, we know a lot of our friends from Canada in particular love coming here, and we've got some border issues. I believe that deals more with auto traffic than airline traffic, but any thoughts on how maybe the border closures could affect some of the normal migration during our winter months here?
Sure. Well, as the outbreak remains, the more control that we have over the outbreak, the higher the likelihood that we'll get the borders reopened. So I don't know if we'll get there or when we'll get there, but we will eventually get there. So you know, we may see a little bit less traffic as long as the outbreak is perceived as out of control, or you know, is higher than we would like it to be. Let's put it that way. You know, for the border, that will matter on both sides of the border. For the internal movement within the U.S., you know, Arizona is such an attractive place for people to move to and to visit that I don't think we'll see much interruption there. You know, there are some who think that the pandemic may actually spur additional migration into Arizona. You know, Arizona draws most of its migrants from California, particularly Southern California. So a lot matters on how we do relative to Southern California in terms of the pandemic. So that'll be something that we'll want to watch. I was a lot more hopeful about that scenario in April than maybe I am today, when we were doing so much better than New York or the East Coast. That got reversed. So we'll see how things play out, but you know, that's kind of a this year and maybe part of next year sort of story. In the long run, Arizona is going to continue to draw a lot more people to the state than we lose to other states. You know, you can't beat the climate. The economic opportunities here are great. So you know, we're going to continue to draw a lot of people from other states, both retirees and people looking to pursue careers.
Well, Dr. Hammond, we're going to put that right on a chamber brochure, because that was perfectly said. For those watching this webinar, if you raise your hand for questions, we could also address them that way. There was also a question that was very technical, but I think it's important to address. Could you maybe talk a little bit, when we look at the Arizona unemployment numbers, we have the traditional unemployment numbers and we have the pandemic unemployment assistance. Can you talk a little bit about those numbers? Because I think when I added the two of them up, I don't know if I'm wrong, I'm not an economist, it seemed to be right around the 1 million mark, but maybe I'm off on that. And when you add up the two, the traditional program and the expanded program, it was a big number.
Right. The one thing you want to keep in mind is that the unemployment rate that we track most closely is the monthly data that comes out of BLS. And this is related to a survey of households, right? So the Census Bureau, on behalf of the BLS, is actually calling a sample of households nationwide and in Arizona and asking them about their employment experiences. And one of the issues that we ran into with that, what's known as the official unemployment rate, which in Arizona is 10%, nationally it's about 11%, was that people were answering that survey in a way that BLS was hoping they wouldn't. They were essentially saying if they were furloughed or not at work, they were saying that they were employed but temporarily off the job, right? BLS decided that they wanted those people classified as unemployed. But once the survey respondent answers the question, BLS never goes back in and changes that answer. It stays the way it was recorded. So the unemployment rates that we've seen both in Arizona and nationally for that official unemployment rate have been lower than even what BLS believes the unemployment rate to actually be under the official definition. They think it's at least a couple percentage points higher at the moment in June. If we go back to March and April, the national rate was about, they believed it was actually 5 percentage points higher than that reported official rate. In addition, the official rate doesn't include people who are, discouraged workers who've stopped searching for work, and others who don't fit under that official definition. And if we use that kind of broader measure, it's called the U6 measure, you get an unemployment rate nationally that I believe is in the neighborhood of 20%, and it would be significantly higher for Arizona as well. So to get to the technical aspects of the question, comparing the number of unemployed from the BLS survey to what you see out of the UI, that is an extremely difficult number to reconcile, particularly during the pandemic. So I've noticed that as well, that big difference. Where I would start is kind of the explanation that I just took you through. But it's likely that the official unemployment rate that, again, in Arizona is around 10% is understating the number of people who are unemployed pretty significantly. So I think I would think of it that way.
Thank you for that detailed answer. There's a lot to unpack there, and it was very helpful. Most of us, not all, but most of us may be at our home office right now. I know I am. How is this going to impact commercial real estate? We have major companies like Google saying they're going to keep remote until, I believe, at least July of 2021. How do you think that this is going to impact that very important sector of our economy?
Yeah, that's an important question, and there's lots of interesting speculation about that these days. Some of it will depend on how long the outbreak lasts. The quicker the outbreak ends or is perceived to be under control, I think the smaller the impacts will be in terms of commercial real estate and other impacts. The longer it lasts, the more likely we are to get really used to this. For the tech companies, my perception of them is they were already pretty comfortable with looser employment practices than many of us are used to. The universities certainly, that's not a kind of a 9 to 5 clock in, clock out sort of job. But for, the broad brush where people could work at home and are now, will they continue to work at home going forward? A lot of that's going to depend on the managers and how comfortable they feel. Are they able to monitor and be comfortable with the productivity that they're getting out of employees while they're at home? And we don't know how fast that will change. We know that people are resistant to change. Without a pandemic, we wouldn't be working at home at this rate, in any way. Once the pandemic ends, there's going to be some soul searching and I'm not sure how that's going to play out. I'm a very routine oriented person. I'm here in the office today. I like the much faster internet connections that I get here in the office than I get at home. It takes 5-10 seconds for one of my files to save over the VPN from home, and there's nothing worse than that. So I can't wait to get back to the office, but we'll see how that plays out. I'm not sure. I can think of good arguments on both sides.
Yeah, well, that's a good point on internet connectivity. And I have 3 children, and sometimes when they're using Netflix in the middle of the day, I go dark. So fortunately today, that's not the case. But, it leads me to this thought, where Garrett Taylor, who does a great job, has been with the Chamber for many years, calls this the golden age of digital. I mean, if this pandemic hit us 10 or 15 years ago, this would be a completely different experience. What are some of maybe the permanent positive gains we may get from this? So we'll be more flexible, I think, forever on when it comes to where we can work. You know, the patterns may go back, but we've learned a lot. There's gains that we have even from this webinar that we could not have done, you know, 4 or 5 months ago. What are some other areas that might be sort of positive legacy items so that we come out of this tragedy with some good that will last us for many generations to come?
Yeah, what I think that the number of things that we do online will be permanently increased. So, you know, for me and the way I do things, the webinar format is, now that everybody knows how to do a webinar, everybody knows how to get on Zoom, I'm probably not going to do as many face-to-face meetings as I used to. I'm not going to be flying around the country to conferences the way I used to, you know, and that's going to make it harder for me to turn down speaking gigs, because now I can't argue that I can't fly across the country. But so the webinar culture, how we get information, that's all going to be a lot different. The meeting culture will be a lot different. There will still be in-person meetings, seminars, presentations, but a lot more of it's going to happen over the web. So making sure that here at the U of A, making sure that our students know how to interview via Zoom effectively, how to present information, how to convince people, how to persuade people online and via Zoom is going to be something that we'll be spending more time doing. So online is going to be a permanently increased thing. The delivery services, that will be a bigger part of our life going forward. So, you know, Amazon, the warehousing and transportation sector of the economy is going to see some significant growth, at least in the near term, before automation catches up with it. In the near term, home renovation is going to be a big deal for the next couple of years. For sure. So I think that it's also going to accelerate some trends towards automation. You know, my local Safeway didn't have self-checkout until the pandemic hit, and now we've got self-checkout. So I think we'll see some more of that as the retailers get more comfortable with that and figure out ways to deal with the issues that self-checkout brings.
Doctor, this has been a wealth of information. I'd love to give you the last word if there's any closing comments you would like to make. And if it's okay, for some of the questions we didn't get to or we get after, we'd love to pass them along and get your just really extremely detailed and helpful answers.
Sure. Well, I would leave you on a positive note. Arizona and Arizona's economy was in really good shape before the pandemic hit. We're going through some tough times, but this is something that is not a forever problem. It's a for now problem. We will medically get a handle on the outbreak, and as we do that, Arizona will rise back to the top of the states in terms of growth. As we invest in our education and continue to invest in human capital, we'll see our standard of living grow rapidly as well.
What a great way to end the program, and our deepest thanks to you, Dr. Hammond, for visiting with us this morning. And I want to thank all of our members and I know that there's a lot of students as well who joined us today. Thank you, and thank you for the great questions and the chat. I want to give special thanks to our webinar sponsor, Arizona Strategies, and Karen Taylor Robeson for making today possible. And everyone, be safe and stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Thank you.